All right, let's step back in time, way back to medieval Europe. Imagine a world of huge contrasts, really strict rules. A place where your entire life was pretty much decided the second you were born. Forget choosing your own adventure. In this world, the path was already laid out for you. So, let me ask you something straight up. If you were just dropped into the Middle Ages right now, who would you be? A king? A knight in shining armor? Or would you be a peasant? It's kind of a fun question for us to think about, right? But for them, for the people living then, there was no choice at all.
Well, here's the reality check. For almost everyone, we're talking over 90% of people, your life would have been right at the bottom of this pyramid. This is what we call the feudal system. It was this super rigid social ladder where everybody knew their place and, crucially, almost nobody ever got to move up. You had the king way up at the top and, well, everyone else down at the bottom.
Okay, so let's dig into this pyramid a little bit because it really did control everything back then. The whole thing was built on two really big ideas: order and obligation. So at its heart, feudalism was basically a giant system of trades and promises. Think about it like this. The king, he owned all the land, right? So he'd grant huge chunks of it, called fiefs, to his most powerful nobles. The deal was, in exchange, those nobles promised him their loyalty and, most importantly, an army when he needed it. And then, way down at the bottom, you have the peasants. They worked the land, grew the food for everybody, and in return, they got protection and a place to live. It was a chain. Everyone served the person above them.
All right, but what if you were one of the lucky ones? What if you were born into a noble family and your path was going to lead to a life of combat and glory? What did it actually take to become a knight? Let's follow that journey.
Yeah, this was no weekend course. It was a full-on apprenticeship that started when you were just a kid. At age 7, a young noble boy was shipped off to another lord's castle to be a page. He'd learn things like manners, maybe some music, the basics. Then at 14, things get serious. He becomes a squire. This is the real deal: training for combat, learning to ride a war horse, and taking care of a knight's armor and weapons, which was literally a full-time job. And then finally, around age 21, if, and that's a big if, he proved he had what it takes, he'd get to kneel and be officially dubbed a knight. But here's the thing, being a knight wasn't just about being good with a sword. It came with this whole set of rules, a moral code we call chivalry. And these ideals were supposed to guide everything they did. A knight had to defend his lord, of course, but he was also supposed to protect the weak, fight for justice, and show a special kind of courtesy to ladies. Now, was it a perfect system? No way. But it was a powerful idea, a standard they were meant to live up to. Okay, but that's the life of the tiny, privileged elite. What about, well, everybody else? Let's pivot now and talk about the other 90%, because their daily reality was a completely different world. I mean, look at this. When you put their duties side by side, the difference is just staggering. A knight's job? Fight for your lord, train for war, uphold chivalry. A peasant's job? Work the lord's land from sunup to sundown, pay taxes, and do whatever your lord tells you. They were like two different species living on the same planet, both bound by duty, but in totally different ways. And for a peasant, their whole world, their entire universe was the manor. This was the lord's land, and it was a totally self-sufficient little bubble. It had the fields, the village, the church, and the big manor house. And for most peasants, who were called serfs, they were literally bound to that land. They couldn't leave. This was the only world they were ever going to see, from the day they were born to the day they died. And what was that world like? It was all about work, relentless, back-breaking work. Just look at this number, 12 to 16 hours. That's how long a peasant worked every single day during planting and harvest time. We're talking sunup to sundown, just a non-stop cycle of labor. And after a day like that, this is where you'd go home. Not some cozy cottage. This is a 1 or 2 room hut built from what's called wattle and daub. And that's really just a fancy way of saying it's a bunch of sticks and woven lattice, all plastered together with mud, clay, and, well, animal dung. It was shelter, but that's about it. And life inside one of these? It was rough. The floors were just dirt, maybe with some straw thrown on top. The thatched roofs, they always leaked. And get this, families would often bring their animals inside at night. Your cow, your chickens, all living with you just to keep them safe. There's no running water, no bathrooms, nothing. So, as you can imagine, disease was everywhere. Life was short and it was really, really hard.
Now, for hundreds of years, this whole system seemed like it was set in stone, unbreakable. But then, things started to change. You started to see these little cracks appear in the foundation. And it all started with a huge fight between a king and his own powerful nobles, which, funnily enough, planted the seed of a brand new idea. And this is it, the Magna Carta, which just means the Great Charter. So here's what happened. Back in 1215, the King of England, a guy named King John, was super unpopular. He kept raising taxes on his nobles to pay for his expensive wars. Eventually, they got fed up, rebelled, and literally forced him to sign this document. And the biggest idea in it, the one that changed everything, was this: even the king has to follow the law. It was the first time anyone had really put it down on paper that a ruler's power had limits, that a piece of paper could be more powerful than a king's army. And, the Magna Carta wasn't a one-and-done thing. It was just the first domino to fall. Look at what happened next. It directly led to the very first English Parliament, which gave the nobles a voice. A few decades later, a law gets passed saying the king can't just create new taxes whenever he wants, he needs Parliament's okay. Now, did this help the average peasant overnight? Not really. But the ideas in it, ideas about liberty and limits on power, they started to spread. And eventually, they helped inspire things like the Peasants' Revolt. It was a long, slow crawl, but this is where it started. To no one will we sell, to no one deny or delay right or justice. Just let that sink in for a second. That's Clause 40 from the Magna Carta. For the very first time, it was written down officially that justice wasn't for sale. It wasn't something only the rich and powerful could afford. It was supposed to be a right for everyone. I mean, what a radical, game-changing idea for that time. And it's an idea that still rings true today. And that really brings us to the big takeaway here. Think about the world you live in. The idea that no one, not a president or a prime minister, is above the law. The idea that you have a right to a fair trial. These huge principles that we kind of take for granted, they didn't just appear out of thin air. Their journey started right here, as a list of demands scribbled on a piece of parchment in a muddy field in England more than 800 years ago. So the next time you hear about your rights, it's worth remembering that they have a very, very long and very medieval history.